Our first panel session for the day, titled Learning the Language and Learning in the Language. Dr. Tayyaba Tamim is Associate Professor and Research Fellow at the Center for Research in Economics and Business at Lahore School of Economics. As a British Council Chevening Scholar, she did her MPhil in Second Language Research from Cambridge University, where she also completed her PhD. Dr. Tayyaba has over 16 years of teaching experience. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Tayyaba Tamim. I also want to add that unfortunately two of our panelists could not be here. Dr. Nandini Singh from India could not be here in person. She has sent in a video submission which we will play during lunch, so please watch out for that. Also, Dr. Irfan Muzaffar, who is a consultant with the KP Education Sector Reform Project and has played an instrumental role in the organization of this conference, also could not make it. So we surely miss their presence. But please, Dr. Tayyaba, if you could introduce this session and your panelists. Thank
you. Is learning in education and learning through education, learning the language and learning in the language. So this panel will highlight the research in the area of language acquisition. We'll talk about medium of instruction, modes and points of transition in the medium. And we will also talk about cognitive development and how language intersects with literacy. So in some ways we will be carrying on with the theme, presented themes of Dr. Carol Benson. However, in this session we will also be talking about the political economy of language policy. And for this I'll request Dr. Tariq Rahman to be here. Dr. Tariq Rahman is currently the Dean of the Social Sciences and School of Education at Beacon House National University. He is a Professor Emeritus at the National Institute of Pakistan Studies, Quaid-e-Azam University. His research spans over more than 2 decades and he examines and interrogates the links between language and politics in Pakistani context. In 2013, he was conferred with Sitara-e-Imtiyaz for his contribution to the field of language research. Welcome to you, Dr. Tariq. I think we can call other panelists also. We would also like to call Dr. Maria Garcia. She's an Associate Professor and in charge Institute of Languages, Director of External Linkages, and Directors of Confucius Institute, Chinese Language at the University of Punjab. She completed her PhD from Madrid, Spain in 2013. And she is also an official Spanish language examiner of the Ministry of Education, Science and Sports at the Government of Spain, and the chief editor of Eurasian Journal of Humanities, which is a bilingual journal. We welcome you, Dr. Garcia.
Thank you very much.
And now we would like to call Mr. Saeed Zubair, if you could please join us. Mr. Saeed Zubair is the director of the Institute of Applied Linguistics in Pakistan for the past 5 years. He has also been serving as an instructor and the training program coordinator for the Institute for over 10 years. He received his foundational linguistics training in the UK and now holds a master's degree in linguistics from Payap University in Thailand. He's a specialist in mother tongue-based multilingual education and is a strong advocate for community-based literacy and education programs in South Pakistan. We welcome you, I would now request Dr. Tariq Rahman to begin the presentation.
Thank you very much indeed. I think I have 15 minutes and I'll try to finish in that way. So now basically, although it says mother tongue education policy in Pakistan, I'm really going to talk about why certain policies failed and how we should look at the documents. The documents actually omit many things. So there are gaps and there are omissions. So what the document says, you know, is not to be read as the truth, so to speak. But we'll come to this, and then what I suggest a little later. Please, let's go on next one, please. So the education policy, basically the aims as stated are modernization, vernacularization, Islamization, and privatization. Modernization from 1947 onwards meant that the country should get some scientific knowledge, people should be trained, and that's in English. So the modernization dictated that some English subjects should be taught in English, but not for all. Right, we come to this. Vernacularization meant that the ethnic threat from Bengali and Sindh, etc., should be neutralized. So it really meant Urduization of the country. I mean, of course, Urdu was the mother tongue of something like 7% people now, and in those days, 1947, 1951 census, something like 4%. Bengalis were more in number. And yet, vernacularization meant this, and not the actual languages of the people. Islamization came a little later, although actually in 1947 this was stated as a goal also. But the trend to commit more resources to it and spend a more rhetorical capital on it, that started a little later after the 1965 war. Privatization really means, I mean, the private sector was there, and it was there for profit, it was there for culture, and it was there for several things. This increased because the state wanted to spend less money on education. And that meant that the nice terms like private-public partnership, etc., was chosen for it, but it really meant that the resources of the state would be spent on the military and on other things, etc., and less on education. Now, the vernacular chosen, as I said, was not the language of the people anywhere except in rural Sindh, where it was Sindhi, but otherwise it was Urdu. In Pashto-speaking areas from class 1 to class 5, in some areas, Pashto was chosen, but only up to class 5. Okay, next one, please. Next one, sir. Okay. So the relevant article of the Constitution, of course, says this. It says the national language of Pakistan is Urdu, and so on. And last year, the government's bluff has been called. So the Supreme Court has ordered that the language of work of the state should actually be changed to Urdu. It has not been implemented. And even if it is, my feeling is that this is not going to bring about a big change, because education, elite education, really is in private hands. And this applies only to government, not to private hands. So the actual problem is whether the elite will allow a change or not. And this elite consists not only of some people sitting on the top, but most of us, because we are allied to it. And our interests and the interests of our children dictate certain policies which are contravention to the actual stated policies given in the Constitution and given elsewhere. Next one, please. So, I mean, let's pass this. The poorest quartile is the highest level of children enrolled, and so on. Now, I'll just go very fast through all these. Basically, we have got so many of these. Government of Pakistan Advisory Board, etc. 1948, 1949, 1950, 1955, 1957, 1947, etc. And they say a few things. Like I said before, they emphasize vernacularization, which means Urduization. They emphasize Islam, and they emphasize a different kind of, they don't say so, but actually what they mean is that certain schools, etc., and children from certain classes are not going to be educated in what they're talking about. That is, they're not going to be educated even in the vernacular. Though that's not stated, but there it is. Next one, please. And so on. Let's go on now, very fast, because I want to say something maybe not important, but something which I think should be said. Okay, next one, please. Next one, okay. What happened to the mother tongue? None of these documents we just passed through have emphasized the mother tongues of the people. Sindhi because it was there and because there was a lot of pressure on the government, etc., but no, nothing else. Punjabi, a huge language, the language of most of the people of this country, was not besides. Other languages were not even mentioned. They are mentioned as 4%, and they are something like 52 languages. So what happened? Well, one good thing happened. That is, the activists of language, etc., including institution working in Pakistan, etc., I'm sure your institution also, they started teaching these languages on their own, language activists, and that's what is happening. So this is the assessment of Balula, Kalasha, and so on, different schools. Next one, please. Torwali, Gojri, etc. And they have said, what Dr. Kyle Bunsen said earlier, that this pilot program has succeeded in the sense that their children do better in other schools after grade 3. That's what they say. But they've not been assessed by an outsider. And I was just talking to the officer here from UNESCO, saying that this is something which UNESCO can do. They can assess them. Next one, please. In Sindh also, the same experiment is going on. Balochi, and next one, please. Mirpur Khas, Ratanabad, we speak Parkari. And next one, please. Okay. So what are the consequences, and several other languages in Sindh also. So what are the consequences of these policies? That is, modernization was confined to the elite institutions, central bureaucracy, military, corporate sector, NGO sector, private education institutions. It resulted in cutting-edge technology, but in weapon development. So there are nuclear weapons. But that does not mean that there are good cars also, or something small, etc. The electricity plugs, etc., are of different sizes, so they don't fit. But nuclear weapons are there, and tanks are there, and MiGs are there, etc., aeroplanes. Vernaculization became a class marker. It meant less expenditure by the state on the education of the masses. It also sharpened ethnic resistance to Urdu. Next one, please. Islamization resulted in the spread of radical Islamist ideas, increased sectarianism and anti-Americanism. Why? Because once General Ziaul Haq ordered that everyone is going to learn Arabic, etc. Now, who was there to teach Arabic? So they got people, obviously, from the madrasas and elsewhere, and not just the madrasas, but anywhere. So Islamist ideas, that is political ideas, masquerading as Islamic ideas, also came in. Obviously, because many of these people became, started teaching their ideas. And therefore, radical Islamist ideas came. And then, of course, the Afghan connection was there, and so on, which we know about. But one of the connections, one of the reasons why they came was because of this policy of Islamization. Privatization resulted in an increase in elite education institutions, including colleges and universities. The state could now be less responsible for education than it might have been if the elite had been using state institutions. Next one, please. So this is the conclusion, that the state's language policy is really to reserve English for the elite while Urdu spread as a lingua franca of the country. This facilitates the elite in socio-economic mobility while functioning as an impediment for other students who cannot afford English medium schooling during these years. The dissemination of Urdu serves the ruling elite's nation-building project by supposedly providing a centralizing, cohesive symbol of the nation. However, resistance to this project actually weakens the nation by providing a source of friction to the state's homogenizing policies. Now I want to add something to this, and that is that I'm so glad that the term minority, which I used to struggle with, has been replaced with something like dominant languages and languages which are not dominant, NDLs. You see, when I wrote my first book, Language and Politics in Pakistan, I was uncomfortable with it and connected language with power. Because you see, look at, in Britain for instance, it's a minority in numbers accent, which actually is the dominant accent. I mean, the received pronunciation and what is called the King's English is the Oxford and Cambridge English, etc., is a minority language, and in numbers, and it's a dominant language. And minorities everywhere are elites. Elites are always minorities. So it's not the numbers, it is how much power you have. So and that's why the term dominant is a better term. Now what happened in Pakistan? Why do our policies fail? There have been policies promoting the mother tongues for class 1, 2 and 3. In Balochistan, 1990s for instance, I've written that in my book giving details. Language activists made all kinds of books for them, primers, and there was a lot of enthusiasm. I went over there and saw the enthusiasm. And it was taught for about 2 years or so. Class 1, class 2, class 3, Balochi, Brahvi and Pashto. Mother tongues were taught, etc. And the children were there and learning going on, etc. Everybody was, the activists seemed to be very happy about it, etc. And then one word was changed. A Muslim League, the government came after that government, and they just wrote the word optional instead of compulsory. And parents changed their children's policy option from Balochi, Brahvi and Pashto to Urdu. Why? Because they felt ghettoized. Because they felt that our children will be burdened with these languages and in the end get no jobs. So this happened in the frontier also. But a long time back that they tried to introduce Pashto, but it failed. Why? Because all these experiments are done on poor children. Because they're done on government schools. Cantonment schools were spared, and English medium schools were spared, etc. And when something is done only on the non-elite, so to speak, etc., on people who are being dominated even otherwise, economically, etc., they are not fools. They don't like to be treated as rats in a laboratory. And they don't want it. That is the reason. They reject their own language because they say if it was such a good thing, why aren't they doing it? You see? So unless we add this to it, that if there is a policy, and there should be a policy of the kind teaching, in northern areas, the language of the people, then it should be for all. If it is not for all, there will be resistance to it. And it will be seen as ghettoization. And that is all I have to say. Thank you. It's exact.
Thank you so much. Why do policies actually fail, and what is there in terms of contradictions in language education policies in Pakistan? This was Dr. Tariq Rahman, and we would now request Dr. Maria to proceed with her paper. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Has been published in the Journal of Elementary Education in Pakistan. It is a model based on the situation in which we have, at the moment. Pakistan has 72 languages, and obviously I agree definitely with Dr. Benson and Dr. Tariq Rahman that teaching children through their mother tongue is definitely the best way to do that. However, in Pakistan, that seems to be impossible because we have 72 languages and we don't have the resources, neither material resources, neither the teachers to be able to do that. For example, if we take Siraiki language, the literacy rate of that group of people is 1%. So from where do we get the teachers to teach Siraiki language to the students? So I really struggle to find out a model in which the elite, non-elite gap could be alleviated somehow. So I am from Spain, and in Spain we had different type of a model early on. For a long time, for 40 years, we had a dictatorship. This dictator actually had hatred for other languages, and he didn't like the other languages of Spain, like for example Catalan, Basque, Valencian, Galician. He didn't like those languages, so he forbade the people from speaking those languages. And for a long time, they were not speaking them, and or they were speaking them, but they were not speaking them in public. And these languages were not taught in public schools, and they were not taught at all. And the writers used to hide and try to publish books under different names that were not theirs, so that they would be able to save their own languages. So what happened at the end in Spain is that everybody was speaking Spanish and not the other regional languages. Also in the Constitution of Spain, it was written that it is the obligation of every citizen of Spain, no matter their mother tongue, that it is the obligation that they should be able to speak Spanish and not only have the right to use it, but the obligation as well. So what did this model create? It created a country where every single citizen was taught Spanish. It became the mother tongue of the Spanish people. And in addition, after the dictator passed away, then the constitution accepted the other regional languages, and now they are also taught in those areas. For example, Galician language is taught in Galicia, Basque language is taught in the Basque country, which is a region of Spain. Catalan is taught in Catalonia, and Valencian is taught in Valencia. So I felt that these had created similar opportunities or the same opportunities for all of the citizens of Spain to achieve different goals, educational goals, professional goals, etc. So the model that I have put together for Pakistan, I would really very much like that every single student be taught through their mother tongue, but that seems to be impossible here, especially with 72 languages. And we have to operate with the resources we have. So the model that I have put together is based on Urdu, English, and 4 regional languages. So I'm going to present that to you right now. The medium of instruction, as Dr. Rahman has very well said, had been different regional languages and mother tongues, but it seems that Urdu and English have been more utilized than other languages. Sindhi has had a better rate of success, I guess, but I am not aware exactly of what is the percentage. But what I'm going to share with you right now is something that maybe we can implement with the resources that we have. In Pakistan, we have 3 types of schools. We have the private schools, in which the medium of instruction could be, the private schools in which the medium of instruction is English, and the children have, when they grow up and they finish their education, they have better opportunities in the international arena. Even they have better opportunities in Pakistan for employment, but they have a less background in their mother tongue, which could be Urdu or it could be some other mother tongue. Okay? And then you have the public schools in which the medium of instruction could be Urdu, in some cases English, but in other cases English is taught only as a subject. And the students coming out from those schools, they are neither proficient in Urdu, neither they are proficient in English. I mean, their Urdu skills are not up to the mark, their English skills are not up to the mark. So these are actually challenged individuals, which are actually having a lot of problems trying to find jobs internationally or even in our country. And then there are the madrasas type of schools, which the medium of instruction is Urdu, in some cases Arabic. The students seem to be very proficient in these 2 languages, but they are unable to speak English. Now I received some information that some madrasas were trying to teach English, which is a development, and I think it's a good news, but the majority of them don't do that. And the students that come out of this system are actually technologically deprived and or not oriented. So getting a job overseas or even in Pakistan is a challenge for them. So I have proposed a model in which we can have some changes in the education policy and also in the language policy. For example, I believe that we should unify the national curriculum. Right now the private schools have the Cambridge, the majority of them. Well, there are some other ones, like for example the American schools have their own system. But the majority of the private schools have Cambridge as their curriculum. So we should unify the national curriculum, so that way the private, the public and the madrasas should have the same type of a syllabus. That is going to be extremely challenging, but if we could achieve that, I believe that a lot of the gap that it is between the schools could be improved. Furthermore, the literacy rate needs to be improved. The schools in the villages are nothing compared to the schools in the cities. And I have heard that a lot of the teachers in those schools don't even show up in the school. So how will children learn if the teachers are not even present? So I believe that this government that we have at the moment with the No Child Left Behind has made a lot of improvements, but still a lot of improvements need to be made. Then my third point is that the language policy of the country should be unified. At the moment, every province of the country has their own language policy, it seems. So I believe that if we have a one national language policy, the gap can also be alleviated. So for that we need to make some language changes. The Supreme Court of Pakistan in 2015 stated that Urdu is the official language of Pakistan. I have written a paper on how this could be achieved, but I don't believe at any point in time this is going to be implemented. So, like in the model of Spain, what should be amended in the constitution, or what I am proposing, is that the national and official language of Pakistan is Urdu, and all Pakistani citizens have the right and obligation to know it and use it. That is not to say that they should forget their mother tongue, but at least they should be able to speak Urdu. I mean, if there are so many citizens of this country that are unable to speak it properly. Like there are many funny cases that you can relate to. If you talk to the Pathans, you know very well that they are Pathans, right? If I start speaking Urdu, my Urdu will be like them probably. So, my point is that every single citizen of Pakistan should be able to speak Urdu and should have the obligation to speak it in official situations or in their daily activities as well, without forgetting their own mother tongue. In para number 2, obviously the English language has achieved the status of educational language, science, technology, social media. So all school children, if all of them are able to speak English and are fluent in this language, they will have the same opportunities as, for example, those students in the private schools. So the gap there will be alleviated. Then the constitutional amendment that I propose there is that the English language should be taught in all primary and secondary schools for the purpose of education, technology, trade and other spheres where it may be needed, so that Pakistani citizens can compete and excel in international environments as well as for official and unofficial purposes. And in para number 3, it is obvious that in some parts of the country, Urdu is not really being taught. Like for example, in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, they say, okay, we are going to teach you in Urdu language. And they utilize books that are in Urdu. But what happens is that their teacher is not proficient in Urdu. And then what they usually do is first they speak in Pashto, or they just make all the children understand in Pashto, and they use a translation system to pass it into Urdu, and then the sum is in Urdu, but obviously since this is not their mother tongue, so they are having a very hard time being able to implement Urdu as a medium of instruction. So I believe that these constitutional changes should be made through a national referendum. Why? Because in the past, when language policies have been enforcing the people, and there is the case of Bengal, where 51% of the population was Bengali, and they wanted the national language and it was not given to them. So obviously the community became very upset, and apart from other reasons, they also separated from Pakistan. So I believe that this is something that the majority of the people need to understand properly and agree with it. So I believe that if we ignore the teaching of English, as I said earlier, the citizens of Pakistan are going to be deprived of the ability to expand their horizons internationally and obtain lucrative jobs. And if we ignore the teaching of Urdu, then we will deprive the citizens of Pakistan of their national, cultural, linguistic and literary legacy, which is actually the right. And if we ignore the regional languages, we will lose a fantastic linguistic legacy. So for this reason, following the approved constitutional changes, we need to amend the national curriculum as well. And for that, this is the next. In para number 1, Urdu should be included in the curriculum of all public schools of the country without detriment to the regional language of the area, with the purpose of achieving a high language proficiency. In para number 2, in the same manner, English should be taught with the purpose of achieving a high language proficiency so that all citizens are able to understand it and use it. And the level of proficiency of all citizens are definitely different. Some cannot understand English, some can write it but not speak it, and other ones who have the opportunity to attend private school, they are very proficient in the 4 skills, which are reading, writing, speaking and listening. Then some other measures should be taken at university level. For example, the teachers at university level in Pakistan, what happens is that the medium of instruction usually is English, or so they say. Then you find teachers that are found speaking Punjabi in the class, speaking Urdu in the class, or whatever the language that the students understand. But to be able to implement the English policy, the teacher should have a minimum score of 7.5 in IELTS or a B1, B2 level according to the European framework of languages. So since our Pakistani universities pride themselves in saying that English is the medium of instruction, they should have some implementation of this. In the madrasa sphere, we will try to improve the situation in a second stage. Without trying to disturb the religious lessons and the teaching of Arabic also, and including English into their curriculum. So these reforms should be aimed at producing higher level of literacy as well as a unified education system that will favor linguistic as well as curriculum homogeneity. And yes, the regional languages of Pakistan should be included in the national curriculum as well as separate subjects in primary as well as secondary schools. At the moment, this policy is not homogeneous. Some schools are teaching in Sindhi, some schools are teaching in Pashto, some universities as well as the civil services teach them as a separate subjects, but this limited knowledge is definitely not enough to ensure proficiency in these regional languages or mother tongues. And it is also not homogeneous, creating different levels of proficiency and opportunities for the students. Furthermore, in order to preserve the regional languages, the ministries of education should create language academies. There are some already there, but I believe that since we have 72 languages, there should be at least one language academy for each language, so that this literary and linguistic legacy can be preserved and ensured. And that is all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Maria Garcia. So, Dr. Garcia presented her trilingual model, and she was talking about how important it is to have equal access to the dominant languages so that the instrumental purposes of education itself can be achieved by all. Thank you so much. We will now request Mr. Saeed to present his paper.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to talk about the applied linguistics and language acquisition. As many people mentioned that linguists needs to do lots of research and show that how linguistics is important in language acquisition. So let's look at language acquisition through a linguist's lenses. As Dr. Maria mentioned, that there are 72 or over 72 languages in Pakistan. So Pakistan is a linguistically diverse country, and so all these languages can be categorized or classified into at least 5 different language families. So if we're talking about Urdu, Punjabi, Sindhi, these languages are Indo-Aryan languages, and Pashto, Baluchi, Hazargi, they are Indo-Iranian languages, and Balti is Sino-Tibetan language, and Brahui is a Dravidian language, and English is spoken throughout Pakistan, is a Germanic language. So you can see that all these language families are presented in Pakistan, and having a diverse, linguistically diverse country is a really great thing, but it actually creates lots of difficulties and issues and complications in education system. So yeah, let's look at the language, the components of languages through linguistics. As I mentioned, that all these different language families, they have different phonologies. So phonology is the sound system of a language where the consonants, vowels, or syllable structure, word structure are identified of a language. So all these language families have different phonologies. So if a child is coming from Baluchi, he doesn't have the phonology of Urdu. Urdu has labiodentral fricatives, fa, and velar fricatives, kha, gha. A Baluch child doesn't have all these sounds. So how is he going to comprehend the encoding and decoding in Urdu language? That's very, very difficult for that poor child when he is put into a setting where he doesn't differentiate between pa and fa. So, and ka and ha, they are same sound into his phonology. And yeah, so this is a whole spectrum of different features in phonology. Stress is another thing, and again in morphology. So going back to phonology, so it's very difficult for a child when a teacher tries to explain, to read the kha and gha, because he can't differentiate between those sounds. So it's hard for him to, again, read and write. That first thing, actually, phonology is the initial or crucial into decoding and encoding. First thing when a child goes, so we teach them alphabets. So this is where it starts the problem for the child. And when we look at the morphology, morphology is where we look at morphemes, and morphemes are the minimal element of a word which carries meaning. So for example, in English, boy is a morpheme, and in order to make it plural, we add another morpheme as boys. So, and every language has a different ways of suffixes, which is s, and prefixes and infixes. So all these affixes have a different system into English, Urdu, and in these other non-dominant languages. So in Urdu, we always teach sight words like ne, ka, genitive markers ka, ke, ki, and ergative marker ne. So they are separate words in Urdu, but if you look at the other, even in other Indo-Aryan languages, which fall under the same language family, they have a different system. They have suffixes to express all these genitive markers or case markers or ergative markers. All these markers are expressed differently. So again, for a child, when he cannot understand all these structure, word structure, he cannot comprehend the literacy. And if we look at syntax, again, the word orders of all these language families are different. English word order is different than Urdu, and again, Baluchi, Pashto is a different word order than all these dominant languages. And pronoun system is a different in all these language families. And agreement is a very crucial feature in Urdu. Verb agrees with subject in gender. So that's why Dr. Maria mentioned that if a Pashto speaks Urdu, we know it's a Pashto because he doesn't have that gender agreement in subject and verb. And Baluch, if a Baluch speaks Urdu, he always masculinize the verb because he doesn't have the gender agreement between verb and subject or object. So they only have number agreements, so plural, singular with the verb, but no gender agreement. So that makes him, that fails him actually when he tries to learn, because consciously he has not been taught in the classroom. He just has the director of, say, Mr. Abbas mentioned this morning that he is not taught Urdu in the classroom, but he's just exposed to it, and Dr. Benson also elaborated on this. So these factors, linguistics factors, are very, very crucial. And social linguistics, if we look at how people use their language in different societies within one language, a girl uses different vocabularies than boy. So if the person doesn't understand or doesn't know which vocabulary you use, that's not appropriate. And the child in Urdu, so we have different vocabularies to address a higher class person or a teacher. In other languages, we don't have that. In Baluchi or another, they only have one second person pronoun. So if a child doesn't know which vocabulary to choose to address a person, he's actually making a blunder. He is failing in speaking that language, the dominant language, the second language, the L2. Discourse is another feature that, so in discourse, every language has its own ways to tell a story. A Baluch tells a story, starts a story differently than Urdu language. So they know the discourse markers, how to start a paragraph, how to start a sentence, and how to start a true story, how to start a fiction story. So there are different discourse markers for each kind of story. So we need to understand all these differences when we are teaching an L1 child into an L2 language. So these are very, very crucial factors, features that we need to understand. So who needs to be involved in all these issues that we have? I think we need to involve lots of stakeholders, curriculum developers, which was mentioned, that if somebody is developing curriculum, if he doesn't understand all these different language families that are represented in Pakistan, he will not incorporate those factors into the curriculum. that a child is coming from into this language. And the teachers need to be involved in training. So they need to be trained when they're teaching a Pashto speaker, a Pashto child or a Baloch child into Urdu. He needs to understand that what are the differences into their L1, because they're coming into a different language. And community needs to be involved, because community needs to own. And all these non-dominant languages are coming from an oral language, or oral society. So they don't have their language in written. So they need to be involved, and when they are involved, they will make it successful. The MLE or the L1 learning, they will make it successful when they understand what is the benefit of this kind of education. And advocates, we're all here advocates. We need to be aware of all these factors, and government officials, of course, when because they are the policy makers. They need to understand all these linguistic factors. I think this is what I wanted to say, and I hope this helps to talk about the linguistics features.
Thank you so much, Mr. Saeed Zubair. So Mr. Zubair actually focused on the dimensions of differences in languages, and Mr. Zubair talked about how when a second language is being taught, those linguistically significant elements within that differ across languages should be explicitly taught rather than being exposed to. So now I will sum up the themes that have across the panel, and then I'll open the panel itself for any questions that the panelists might have, and later on I'll move on to open the session for question and answers from the audience. All right, when we in this very interesting discussion, what Dr. Tariq Rahman highlighted was a macro look at what was happening in Pakistan. He highlighted the tensions within language policy, the politics that play upon the selection of vernacular, and he also highlighted why it might not be possible for Urdu to gain dominance, or for regional languages to be there to sort of gain that kind of dominance, because it is against the interests of the elite to have that kind of dominance. So this is the elite that is proficient in English language, and on the basis of that distinction, it is able to maintain its privilege. We move on to Dr. Maria Garcia. Dr. Maria Garcia actually somehow takes on the same theme, but in a different way. So she highlights that how important in the given context dominant languages are, and at times when regional languages are taught, it's only they might not be enough to enable the disadvantaged population to participate in dominant discourses and to have a voice. Dr. Tariq Rahman also talked about the same thing, and he said that all these experiments of multilingualism are often done only in public schools, and the elite, while the elite just continue learning English language. So Dr. Maria has this formula of 3 languages, same curriculum, same language policy for all. Mr. Zubair, Saeed Zubair talked about how learning the second language itself, and he highlighted the importance that when second language is taught, for a better proficiency, the teachers need to be trained to explicitly teach the differences across languages and highlight those differences for the learners. So I'll open the panel for discussion, and if you would allow me, I'll begin the session with a question to the panelists. So my question is that if we talk about the importance of regional languages, or the importance of languages, other languages, community-based languages that need to be taught, how do we deal with the attitude of the parents themselves who want the learners to learn the English language for the right reasons, of course, because this is the way, or this is the means to get ahead? Yeah.
Okay. In my view, communities they can be persuaded, they can be taught. Secondly, if there is a policy, and it's a uniform policy, and it is assumed to be the habitus, it's assumed to be the way to do things. Now, of course, we haven't created that, but if that is created, then it is possible. And secondly, we call them regional languages. This by itself degrades languages, and huge languages like Punjabi, etc., are actually national languages. And Urdu should not be the only national language. This by itself is wrong from the beginning. So at least 5 national languages are necessary anyway. Besides, if there are concentrations of people, like there are in people who speak Balti, let's say, then it is possible, and this is because the population numbers are large, it is very much possible to have schools in Balti, state schools running in Balti, all schools functioning over there in Balti, Khan Foundation also functioning in Balti. It is possible. So if this becomes the norm, parents know that the only way to go to other languages is for the first child to learn her or his own language, then it is possible. Of course it will take time, it will take TV programs, it will take radio programs and all, it will take persuasion, and above all it will take sincerity and money. What happens is that parents know that this is not sincere, this is going to change, and they're being taken for a ride. Unless that kind of thing changes, parents will not be persuaded. That's it.
Any other questions?
Well, I believe that national policies cannot be implemented if the main stakeholders are against them. So, for example, the other day I was talking to one of my students, and she was saying to me that my parents speak Punjabi between them, but they speak Urdu with us. So I said, why is it like that? And she said that, well, they believe that Urdu had a higher status, and this is the reason why they didn't want us to learn Punjabi. So, I mean, it depends on the stakeholders themselves. How do you implement anything that doesn't want to be implemented? It's just like implementing the official language of Pakistan as Urdu. The Supreme Court was unable to write the order in Urdu. They wrote it in English, even though they were saying that all of the orders of any court have to be in Urdu. So if you are not implementing, if the main stakeholders are not implementing this policy, how can anybody else implement the policy?
I think it needs to come from the top, from the policy, the implementer or the government. I think our government sees multilingual education or the L1 learning as a threat. I don't know if they think that it's against the federation, which is not true. If we want to strengthen the federation, I think this is the way to strengthen the communities, the non-dominant languages. It actually strengthened the federation, and we've seen examples in Thailand. They actually went to Patani Malay in the southern Thailand because they had issues with the mainstream and these southern Thailand Muslims. They always had conflict when they went and they say, okay, what is the causes that they are they are not in the mainstream, why they are excluded. So then they actually they are still trying to bring them into the mainstream by actually teaching them into their language. It actually resolves the conflicts, but they need to understand it as actually strengthening the federation, not weakening the federation. I think Dr. Tariq Rahman mentioned this in his book. Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Zubair, you're absolutely right. Let me give 3 examples. First, Spain, because it was given by you. Actually, Spain would have broken up really if General Franco's orders had not been reversed, and instead of that, positive discrimination for Basque and the other languages you mentioned, and Catalonia, etc., were not given. Secondly, Canada would have broken up too. If the French Canadian and Quebec, again, positive discrimination, it saved the federation. Thirdly, small country Belgium, but the Flemish language movement was strong, etc. They had to accommodate it, and it was good policy. It has saved Belgium as one country. And lastly, India. There was a lot of trouble in India also on linguistic grounds. Still, Mr. Nehru allowed linguistic states. Now there are other troubles, but not this one. So it is, you're absolutely right that actually federations get strengthened, but they also gain their strength if along with that, it is not a cosmetic measure. We did that too. In 1955, Bengali was given the status of the second national language of Pakistan. But that didn't change things, because everything else stayed the same. The economic policy was still against what is now Bangladesh. The cultural policy was against them. They were still looked down upon. So just language doesn't change things. It has to be accompanied with a holistic effort of being actually just. And that is what changes things. So in these other countries, which I gave examples, this was seen to be done. And that is necessary. But it will strengthen the federation anyway.
Thank you so much. I'll open the session for question and answers from the audience. Yes, please, Dr. Rahman.
Thank you very much for a very interesting set of presentations. My question is to Maria, and I'm wondering whether it is possible or desirable to either impose or create homogeneity on an estimated 190 million citizens. And how do you do that? Second is just a comment in relation, it's not a question, but a comment in relation to the links between language and nationalistic aspirations. So yes, predominantly in all these cases, there are links, but nationalism may exist without a corresponding demand for an ethnic language. Take the case of Scotland, for example, where Scottish nationalism exists despite a corresponding demand for Scottish language, whereas Welsh are very committed to a United Kingdom despite using the Welsh language in Scotland. Welsh speaks. Thank you.
Well, I think that one thing doesn't exclude the other. Like in Spain, for example, the model that we were discussing before, and Dr. Benson also discussed the case of the Basque Country where they were teaching in 4 languages. My model was just a model to bridge the gap between those who only are able to speak Urdu and regional languages and those who are more privileged because they have learned English. And I believe that people will agree. Why? Because they, in their mind, English is a better language. Okay, but of course there could be opposers, and it all depends on the stakeholders themselves. If the government, for example, decides to adopt my model, which I doubt very much, but if they do, so they could pass some type of questionnaire among the people, asking them, will you approve this model for your children? And you will get the answers.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, please? Sorry, for you first.
Comment further on the aspects of the political economy of language policy. I think many would agree, of course, with the holistic view that it's simply not sufficient to make changes in language policy if there aren't parallel, reforms in the economy itself. And of course, that I think introduces the very interesting dimension, which I don't think really has been sufficiently explored in terms of which languages are contributing most, for example, to the formal economy and national GDP, and which are those languages which are making a very valuable contribution to, shall we say, the non-formal aspects of the economy, and what's the ratio of those two different, aspects of the economy to national GDP. So I think we need much greater, stronger linkages between linguists and economists. Carol mentioned, I think, the only well-known economist of language, Francois Grin. I think perhaps we need more of that sort of cross-disciplinary work. Now, to turn that into a question, I'd just be interested to hear your views on what particular reforms would you like to see in the economy, whether in the formal or the non-formal domain, to show greater light on these linkages, and so that there's greater value given to particularly local and regional languages and their contribution to the national GDP, which would actually strengthen that, and how would you see that being taken forward? Thank you. Yes, Dr. Toad, but if other panelists all have contributions, I'd welcome those.
Well, absolutely. I once studied trucks, and I looked at the languages of, written on trucks, etc. And I found that trucks go from all over the country, in fact from Karachi to Kabul, etc. And the language most used in that was Urdu. After that it was Pashto. Pashto because that's generally the truck driver's language. And now someone has to write these. So the local, economy of writing, etc., fetches some money for those who can write Pashto and those who can write Urdu, etc. But not Sindhi, not Balochi, and there's very little, there's some Punjabi, but less than the others. Then just look at the TV programs and the radio programs, etc. Since they allowed Brushiski and Balti, etc., there is far more money flowing into that, etc. And in Balochistan, the experiment I was talking about, for the few years when Balochi and Rabri and Pashto were allowed, etc., there was printing of books, etc. So printers invested money. So actually, what happens is, I feel that the momentum is built up because you do that, and then more people are interested because their jobs depend upon it, their living depend upon it, etc. So the mere fact of introducing a number of languages in different areas, etc., would by itself create this kind of momentum. But at the moment, because the state, since a very long time, of course, I mean the Mughal state emphasized Persian, a foreign language. The British emphasized English, etc. And the Pakistani state has emphasized English for the elite, etc. A little bit of Urdu. So the economy which has been created around at the moment focuses on these. But this can be changed. One last thing I'd like to say, that the Urdu language has been associated with nationalism of a chauvinistic kind, and Islam, some of it political Islam. Unless this changes, the changes towards Urdu might actually backfire on the cultural and the political and other front, because students would be exposed only to values which it carries at the moment. So it is possible. There was a progressive language movement in Urdu. There was progressive literature written in the 1930s in Urdu. So it is not that Urdu is inextricably linked with a certain way of thinking or ways of thinking. It can be changed. That too would require a huge change in the kind of books you produce, the kind of text you bring out and then translate, etc., which is of course a link with economy. That's all I can say, but one needs an expert on this.
Definitely what Dr. Tariq has said is definitely the case. But I would like to add something to that, which is that the English language industry in this country is generating a lot of profit as well. So that is another factor that we should have into consideration.
Thank you very much.
Yes, I think my name is Javed Malik. I work with DFID. I think what we are really trying to find out here is a path of having actually community-based language systems in the mainstream education policy really. And I think I wonder whether we have more appreciation for like the constraints within policy making. I mean, you guys really working without budget lines or parliamentary cycles or capacity gaps. I led Punjab program for 6 years and even converting textbooks for class 1, 2, 3 and 4 for 4 subjects. It took us 4 years with the might of the Chief Minister, with technical experts, others, even to kind of convert those books into kind of more. My point is that actually it's extremely hard if you come up with very radical proposals to translate that into textbooks. I wonder whether the roots could be more cultural rather than academic. I mean, we start normally with saying that, okay, introduce these books, but whether we kind of use culture as a medium to kind of start with drama, cultural aspects in local languages, in schools, so that people could start appreciating the culture and then later transition to another kind of level where we could have more kind of formal teaching in these languages. I was in South Sudan last year as a new country and they were trying to kind of develop their own language policy. And there are 57 languages and they wanted to convert all of them into text because this new country really wanted to preserve culture. And I calculated it needed $65 million. And there was $0 million for that particular bit in that. So I mean my point is that the lesser we have the gulf between the aspiration and the practicalities of policy making, the more we would actually be closer to real implementation of some form of actually local languages and mainstream work out. So I mean, your reflection would be great. We had really for 11. Thank you.
Would panelists like to comment? All right. Any other questions? Thank you. Yes, please. Gigi, you raised your hand.
First of all, I would like to pay thanks to the Sahi and Mr. Rashid for holding such an excellent conference by inviting national and international scholars. My first question is to Mr. Tariq Rahman. Do you think that how many languages like Pashto, Sindhi, Punjabi and Balochi should be included in all the provincial syllabus? And second question is to Dr. Maria. What do you think that? How many national and international languages? As you described that there are 72 languages in Pakistan. So English is a compulsory part of the syllabus up to graduation level. Do you think that how many other languages, as it has been told in the presentation that multilingualism increase the intelligence of the students? So except English, how many other languages should be included for the Pakistani students in the public and private sector? And my third question is to Mr. Saeed Zubair, that your institution has done any comparative study regarding alphabet of all these main languages like Pashto, Balochi, Saraiki, etc. Thank you. Okay, the last question also needs to be answered. I do not know about the figure of 65 million. But this is when probably foreign consultants were asked to create the reading material. And no, right. When that happens, of course, things are inflated beyond measure. But it is possible because it is possible to create local textbooks. They have been done in these schools. I mean, where you teach Shina, etc. Like I just pointed out, several of these languages are done. It's done. They have actually given the figures, which I've forgotten, but it's much cheaper. Then there's a very interesting experiment called the Bakarwal School. Now these are people who go with goats. They travel from the north to the south with goats. And what they do is they take about 10 people from each community, and only those 10 people are taught, and then they give stories in the Bakarwal's own language, which is a form of Gujri, etc. And so you convert it to audio recording, and that is much cheaper, etc. And then the children are taught in that. After listening to songs and after listening to stories, they come back to the school, and they are located, I think, for 3 months in Muzaffarabad and other areas, and they are taught in those 3 months, and they learn to recognize the alphabet much faster. So I think it is possible with less money. And secondly, $65 million. I don't know if you know the cost of making a nuclear warhead and a squadron of tanks. It comes to this much. My figures are probably wrong because I'm talking about 10 years back, but it comes to this much if you import so much. So it is possible. Secondly, which languages? Out of so many, first the figure of 72 is, since I'm not competent in linguistics, I don't know how to dispute it. But if you just look at that figure, ethnologue is given that figure. Pashto has been divided into 3. And so many other languages also divided into. They are actually varieties of that. So South Pashto and North Pashto should count really as one language, because I mean, speaking, yes, there are changes, but there are differences, like there are in every language, in English and in French and everything. But you don't need books based entirely on those changes. The differences are very little, so they are not 72. In my view, they are something like 56. And some of them are really quite small, so maybe it would be like Domaki, which is now called Dawoodi. About 200 people speak it, etc. It is necessary to save that, but it would cost very little, actually, to save it, etc. And then we are talking about only the first 3 years of education. We are not talking forever. The idea is that after learning these languages, as far as possible, in their own mother tongue, they would graduate to something higher, not higher, but different. And they would graduate to, let's say, Urdu, and they would learn English in school, etc. That is the idea. And I think this is doable. So one doesn't have to add too many languages. The mother tongues, or the first language, they already know. All that is being suggested is to make it into an official language of use in school, so that it does not get degraded to something which must be kept out of the school. That is all that is being suggested.
Thank you very much. We still have time for more questions. Sorry.
This question has to be addressed. There was a question for...
All right, sorry. Dr. Maria Garcia.
In regard to your question, how many languages should be taught? Yes, the figure of 72 languages was given by the ethnologue, like Dr. Rahman said, and Dr. Rahman believes there were 56 if we don't count the varieties of each language. 56 is still a very large amount of languages to be taught all over the country as a mother tongue and as a medium of instruction. What my model was proposing is that teach the regional languages of Pakistan. Because we don't have the budget to be teaching every single language in every location, right? The government is never going to give us that budget. And The other thing is that we can do is increase the education budget for not just the languages, but in general, because 4% of the GDP is definitely not enough. Many other countries have a much larger budget for education. I think this answers your question. Does it answer your question? Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Mr.
Would you like to answer, please? Yeah.
Yes, we started actually compiling word lists and pronouns charts, grammatical differences, but we haven't been able to publish them in hard copy. But they are available on our website, trust.org. So you can go and look at and see the comparison of these languages that are spoken in South Pakistan. So they don't include the northern languages, they are just southern languages, which of course there are several more languages that we haven't touched yet, but that's, yeah, that we're working on it.
Thank you very much. Abasa wanted to ask a question.
I was just wanting Mr. Zubair to respond to an earlier
All right.
question.
All right.
So it was
Okay.
clear.
Yeah. Yes, please.
No. I'm Ejaz from FLI Islamabad. Sir, first Ejaz from Islamabad. Sir, a comment that Miss Maria said that it will be very expensive initiating MLE in more than 72. So there are case studies from Philippines, from Thailand that there is no such question here. So not a big difference between monolingualism and multilingualism. So there are mistakes. My question is, you are proposing to at least teach the regional languages. So in KPK cases, there is Pashto, a regional language. I am from Chitral. There are not Pashtuns. So you are forcing me to learn the Pashto?
I would not like anybody to be forced to learn anything they don't want to learn. Okay?
You are just proposing that.
I'm just proposing that at least the regional languages should be taught. I would like that you will be taught your own language. But I don't believe that we are ever going to get that budget or those resources or those teachers that are qualified in your language with a master's degree in your language and are able to teach the children. If we are, then I would really love that.
So if your proposal is taken up, so I will be forced to learn.
So then you can make a different proposal.
Thank you very much. Any more questions, please? Yes, please. Yeah. Either.
I'm Rana Ghulam Mohyuddin. Basically, I am a teacher. I have gone through a research in misconceptions of mathematics by the primary school children. And it was very interesting for you that the students know how to simplify a fraction in their mother tongue, but they were answered wrong in their question paper. And when I studied, I found that there are a lot of other problems. The students of Punjabi background, when we teach them in English or in Urdu, the teachers actually teach them in their own language. They are not teaching them in Urdu or English. They are just taking the script of the book. And the language is very basic thing, I think, in developing the learning of students. And if we make the policy like this, that all the schools of Punjab must be English medium, all the schools must be English medium from now onward. How many teachers are there to teach the subject in English, the science, the mathematics and social studies. How many teachers can teach these subjects with the help of some training, with the help of some phonology? This is simply, we are reverting back now in Urdu medium in our public schools.
Your question, sir?
Yeah, this is my question, the comment.
So the question is? It's a comment, all right. There was this, yeah, first.
I think, like you have mentioned about, the issue is the implementation of policies, and then Dr. Mahir has also mentioned about having one policy and unified curriculum. But I think the key challenge in Pakistan is, I think, as you have mentioned, that we have to empower everyone, because if we want everyone to have the same opportunity. The challenge in Pakistan is, as the private sector is growing in a mushroom way, there are many factors, but one of the factors is the English language over there. But when we talk about the critical thinking and move away from the rote learning, then I think the language aspect is also very much important. So after 18th Amendment, where the responsibility is at the provincial level. So how do you see how we can move towards that, where we want to make sure that we are empowering everyone, irrespective of the private schools or the government schools or the community schools, there is something which is unified. Keeping that in view, what do you see, what should be the policy? For example, like, should we look at the earlier grades, like the grade 1, 2, 3, what should be the policy? One language, two languages, multi-languages, and at the middle secondary level, and then of course higher. I mean, how do you see how to go about that if we have to recommend government something? Because, and then of course how to make sure that there is an implementation as well.
Thank you so much. Question passed on to the panelists.
Look, as far as the province, the 18th Amendment and the power being with provinces. Now, this, the power is with the provincial chief minister and the secretaries and the bureaucracy which run the province. This does not mean that everyone is getting a fair deal. For instance, look at the Punjab province. From the linguistic point of view, the Saraiki area has been struggling for quite some time to be given an autonomous in the sense, of course, within the country, but being made into a province. That has not happened. So any policy which comes from Lahore and is implemented over there is not going to work. It's going to be resisted. So even within the province, there is this maldistribution of power. And look at KP. There is the Hazara language movement over there. And in fact, they are strong, and I mean they can be rich and powerful because they have this dam, the big Tarvela dam, which supplies electricity to the rest of KP. If the Bela dam goes to Hazara, then the rest of KP would be poorer and Hazara would be richer. So they wanted a separate province, and their language is Hindko, a separate language, etc. And of course KP doesn't want it. That's why when this name Khyber Pakhtunkhwa was chosen, Hazara people resisted it. They didn't want this name because both of these are implemented in the Pashto speaking areas. Look at Balochistan. This area, Lorelei, etc. is Pashto speaking. And this was taken in the Treaty of Gandamak from the Afghan king. The British took it, and it was supposed to be returned at some time, etc. Actually, the treaty does say it's supposed to be returned. It was never returned. And that's Pashto speaking area. It's not Balochi speaking, it's not Punjabi speaking. So the province has been, again, there have been people demanding that over there in Balochistan, that you should divide this into a Pashto speaking area and into Balochi Brahmi kind of area, etc. So giving it to the province does not mean that everything is now going to be distributed according at least linguistically, according to how it should be done. If you make linguistic provinces, then it is possible. Except, of course, in Sindh, because in Sindh, if this is done, it would be unjust actually. In my view, I mean, this looks like biased against Urdu speakers, but it is not. The idea is that here are people who come from outside, they are settled in the urban areas of Sindh for whatever reason, etc. And if now Sindh province is divided between the Urdu-speaking Sindh and Sindhi-speaking Sindh, there will be more bloodshed and trouble. There wouldn't be in the other provinces. In India, there wasn't. So everything has to be looked at, whether it is useful for people, whether it causes less trouble or more trouble. So it's not necessary for everyone. But it is possible to have a policy of linguistic provinces which are more just and where power goes down and does not stay in the center of that province. That has not happened. 18th Amendment has empowered provincial governments, but not the different constituents of the province. So that would be my take on it. Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much. Last question from Ms. Zubair Jalan. Oh, sorry. Zubaida Mustafa. Sorry. I know her. Sorry.
Actually, I just wanted to add something very first to what Dr. Tariq Rahman just said. You are absolutely right about what the 18th Amendment has done. But you know, another development which is taking place, and I've noticed this not much talked about, is that they are now trying to bypass the autonomy of the provinces, at least in education, and the interprovincial ministerial committee. They have been planning, I mean, even the curriculum and language and things like this. But we don't know what is happening. And the interesting part is that Sindh is not very regular in attending those meetings, because I think there is a difference between them. That is one point. The other point I wanted to say was, it was again for what Dr. Tariq Rahman said, because I agree entirely with equity and what you raised, the issues you raised. There's one thing more, that as far as languages go, like we did have Bengali and all, but it's also a question of showing some respect to the other language, which unfortunately we did not. And just to take the example of Canada, because I visit that and I know that all the political leaders, at least all the top ones, they speak both the languages, whether it's Mr. Trudeau, who's French speaking but speak English as well, or the others who speak English but they speak French. And they make it in their public speeches which they make. They are bilingual. The speeches are bilingual, maybe one paragraph in English, one in French, and so it goes on. It is very symbolic, I would say, although the French speakers are very small in number, but all the labeling on whatever goods are sold, they are in both the languages. So that is one thing. The other thing connected to Pakistan, because I think somebody asked about the economic factors which are there. Over here, I feel that sometimes English is promoted. Why it's done, I don't know. Because, for instance, there was a survey conducted by Euromonitor, it was in 2011. And they said they surveyed about 30 multinational companies. And it very categorically said that those people who can speak English, their salaries are about 10% higher than those who can't. Now, it's all right for the top managers because they have to communicate internationally. But what about the biggest gap was in the salaries of janitors, the salaries of carpenters, who I think could do very well without English also, if they didn't know. But why did they have to have the difference? I don't know. And it is like, and the government has not done anything. Where it wants to, it does, because you have these O-level and A-level exams over here. And it is at the government's insistence that Cambridge University or London University, they've had to include Urdu and Islamiyat and Pakistani studies. But the multinationals, they are allowed to do what they want and they can carry it on. And that also creates a pressure for English for many people who may not really be that interested, but they do want jobs.
Thank you so much for the comment. Would you like to sort of comment on it? No? Thank you so much. With this, we'll close this session. Thank you so much, Mr. Saeed Zubair, Dr. Maria Garcia, and Dr. Tariq Rahman, and everyone over here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, panelists and Dr. Tayyaba, for concluding the first panel discussion of the event. And what an engaging discussion that was. For the questions and comments that were not answered, please take the opportunity to meet with the panelists in the break that we now have. We have a break of around an hour and a half for lunch and Jummah prayer. Jummah prayers can be offered inside the hotel. There's a prayer room on this floor. And we'll be reconvening at 2:30 p.m. for the next panel. Thank you.
We'll be moving from higher level debate to hopefully both a provincial level and also somewhat going into the classroom as well, and talk a little bit about that also. Let me invite the panelists. We have three wonderful panelists today. Ms. Zubaida Mustafa. I don't know what to say about Zubaida. Everyone knows Zubaida. Zubaida has done so much work. As a journalist, she was with Dawn for more than 30 years. She has written a lot on social issues. A number of Lifetime Achievement Awards. My introduction to her is through both her articles as well as the book that she wrote on the tyranny of language, which has come recently in a revised edition as well. So Zubaida would be with us talking about, I think, taking the cue from her book and moving forward.
Front and center.